In this podcast, I'm going to be looking at the character of Macbeth and questioning to what extent he's a tragic hero. Macbeth the play is a tragedy. It's regarded as one of the four great tragedies, the others being Hamlet, Othello and King Lear. And for that to be the case, the character of Macbeth has to conform to the principles of the tragic hero, which is a specific kind of character that goes back to the ancient Greeks. And in order to count as a tragic hero, certain conditions have to be met. Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, is the one who really formalized the concept of what a tragic hero was. And his key idea, or one of his key ideas, is that the tragic hero ultimately has to be a good person with a fatal flaw. They have to start out in a state of grace. They have to start out fundamentally a good person, or they can't have a downfall. There's no downfall for a character who starts at the bottom. And there's some key terminology that goes along with that, of which I have some examples here. So the first one, hamartia, the idea that a character must have some kind of fatal flaw or make some fatal mistake that brings their downfall upon themselves. They can't fail entirely down to random chance. They can't fail entirely because some villainous character has arranged it all. They have to some extent, bring their downfall upon themselves through some fatal error, which leads to peripeteia, which is the turning point, the moment where their fortunes stop going up and start going down. They cross a point of no return. So, for example, in Romeo and Juliet, it would be the murder of Tybalt, the point where Romeo's fate is sealed. And then a slightly more obscure piece of terminology, ananorisis, is the moment where the hero realises their mistake. They are left in no doubt as to the extent of the tragedy. A tragic hero is never ignorant of their own downfall. They never die or go to prison or suffer whatever fate is theirs without realising it. And the moment of ananorisis is the moment they realise what has happened to them. In some plays, the moment of peripeteia and the moment of ananorisis refer to the same thing. They're talking about the same point in the plot. Other plays have them separated out. Now, this question is very important. Was Macbeth ever a good man? For him to be a tragic hero, he kind of has to be, because the concept of a tragic hero relies on him starting in a position of goodness and then falling from that position. And that interpretation doesn't work so well if he starts the play just as evil as he finishes. So, there's really two possibilities. Was he a good man whose goodness was polluted and subverted by his wife? Or did he always have that aspect to his character from the very beginning? That second possibility doesn't necessarily mean he can't still be a good man. It just means he's an essentially good man, but with a fatal flaw, with a hamartia, which would make him a tragic hero. Now, both these options are plausible. Both these options have evidence to support them. That doesn't mean they're both equally good or they're equally plausible, but there is evidence to support each one. There's no possibility that is so strong that you can completely exclude the other. You have to allow for both. And when we talk about alternative interpretations, this is really what we mean. We don't want you to fake an interpretation that you don't really believe just so you can argue against it and say that you've looked at alternative interpretations. You need to be looking at different ways of looking at the same moment, or different ways of interpreting the same character that are both possible. So let's look at this interpretation first of all, the idea that he's a good man who is subverted by his wife. Now, this interpretation puts a lot of the blame for what happens in the play onto Lady Macbeth, and the responsibility of Lady Macbeth and her actions are an argument for another time. There's another podcast about them. In this case, there's a lot of evidence from other characters in the early part of the play that state Macbeth is very good. We are first introduced to Macbeth second-hand. We hear about him before we see him, by a soldier who's explaining to King Duncan just what a decisive victory Macbeth scored against the enemy. Brave Macbeth, well he deserves that name. And then later on, when Lady Macbeth is talking about how she wants him to commit treason and murder Duncan and take the crown to fulfill the prophecy, she talks about how he's too naturally good to do it without her help. Now that may or may not be true, but you might start to notice here that all this talk of Macbeth's goodness is not coming from Macbeth himself. It's coming from other characters, which raises the question, well, how much should we take their word for it? Who is this soldier that we should take at face value that Macbeth is brave? Why should we take Lady Macbeth's word for it that Macbeth is really full of the milk of human kindness? We don't actually see that evidence for ourselves. This interpretation relies on us treating these characters as accurate judges. And it's not necessarily a good idea to assume that. It might be true, but we don't really have very much backing it up, except the fact that two separate characters both praise him. But when it comes to the murder of Duncan, Macbeth is doubtful, he is remorseful, it clearly affects him emotionally. He's not the cold psychopath that his wife appears to be, or the cold psychopath that he appears to become down the line. That said, that level of doubt and that remorse doesn't stop him being able to commit the crime. He still goes through with it. So even if he does feel doubt and he does feel remorse, you might question what it's worth. Now let's have a look at the other interpretation, the idea that Macbeth is always bad from the start. This requires us to disbelieve the soldier and disbelieve Lady Macbeth, which is not necessarily the best idea. It might be that there's some middle ground between the two interpretations, but there is evidence of Macbeth's hamartia early in the play. So he talks about Malcolm being a step on which I must fall down or else o'erleap. And he talks about having black and deep desires, which we are invited to infer include murder or treason. And the important thing about this line, it's a structural point, is that he says this before Lady Macbeth appears. Lady Macbeth's manipulation does not have anything to do with this line. So this demonstrates, if nothing else, that Lady Macbeth is not totally responsible. She might be largely responsible, but she's not entirely responsible. She doesn't put the idea in Macbeth's head in its entirety. There's an aspect of Macbeth that's doing this before that. And the key question here is that word desires. When he talks about desires, what does he really mean? Is he talking about a general statement of preference, or is he talking about intention? Does he intend to do something about it, or is he talking more generally? Both interpretations are valid, and both profoundly affect how you interpret Macbeth's character. So the first possibility, that he's a good man subverted by his wife, is the cleaner one. It makes him a neater fit for the concept of the tragic hero. And there's plenty of evidence to support it, but the evidence isn't perfect. So you can't sit there and say that it's a done deal. It's not, even if it's perhaps the better of the two options. There's enough evidence for the other option that you still have to give it time of day. He does have a clear moment of anagnorisis, the moment of realisation, where Macduff reveals the truth of his parentage and Macbeth realises that the prophecy has come true exactly as the witches have said, and everything that he's tried to do to stop it coming true has failed. Hamartia and Peripeteia are present as well, which means this question of whether he's a tragic hero really comes down to the state of grace at the beginning. So if you're interpreting the character of Macbeth and you're questioning whether or not he's a true tragic hero, you really need to look at the early section of the play and see how he's presented before Lady Macbeth gets her claws into him to come to your judgment.